John here at Loon's Landing, Loon's Foot, I guess is actually what it's called, Loon's Foot. And it's the boat launch here, the main boat launch here in Superior. Then it's got this marina here where the guy's got a bunch of sailboats and stuff stored. Oh, you can't really see it from here so much. But anyway, he has a bunch of sailboat storage. And as far, I guess he has some in-water ones too as well. So I guess it's depending, I don't know. I guess with some of these people, maybe they don't have their boat in the water that often or whatever. So anyway, it all depends. If it's people who just come up here every once in a while, and then, they rely on him to hoist it in and everything. And then this is like an old ore dock that he owns too. Oh, and there's that Charlie. It's that schooner there. So that's a nice one. Yeah, so what I want to talk about today is 10 reasons that Jungian psychology makes van life more fun. Or I suppose I will be doing something like saying like how it makes van life not suck or something like that, right? That's probably the clickbait I'm going to have to use to try to get any views on this. Why is it what is there about it that actually Jungian psychology that can actually make being out on the road, doing van life type stuff be more fun? And of course, this isn't true just to van life people, but this is to make it show up a little bit more specifically in the algorithm. All right, so Jungian psychology, without going too much into exactly about who Carl Jung is and what it's about, but basically, if you know anything about it, it has something to do with the unconscious and your memories and your dreams and all that stuff, but it's just a little more complicated than what Freud thought as far as dreams and stuff is maybe what we can say. So, all right, so the first thing we're going to say, and then maybe we'll just learn more about Jungian psychology in this video as we go along. First reason why Jungian psychology can make van life more fun is you're free to say, I have a feeling. A lot of us were always like raised in kind of an over rationalistic type thing, or like I came from like a science and stuff, and went to school for that, is what I meant. And then obviously spent a lot of time with those type people, but then so the idea of like, hey, I've got a feeling, that usually to a lot of people, they they would hate that expression, but I just have a feeling or something like that, so it's like, so you got to think like, what is that about it? Well, in the idea of like Jungian psychology, it's not like he's against the idea of like cause and effect, regular science and all that kind of stuff, but he also realizes, hey, there's a lot of unconscious going on there. There's that in your mind, you notice all kinds of things that happen, and then you have an unconscious that is just kind of just to give the most simple thing is your unconscious has kind of like a personality, and it's trying to talk to you in a way. And if you kind of like, and he believes that there was different techniques you could do that, and one of them is just like, intuition. I think that, oh yeah, that's right. They've come up with some new things recently that came in where they're saying about, you have these neurons in that your stomach kind of thinks, and it's the whole thing that you can kind of, and it's the whole thing of understanding what the idea of like intuition is, that it's which is actually different from feeling, but we won't get that much into it now. But just, feeling free to just say, hey, I have a feeling about something, and kind of integrating, both, and then the idea is like, it's kind of like a little bit of a step back from like the logic, rational type Western thought that we always do. Not completely, but just going back a little bit, kind of balancing things a little bit where it's okay to kind of like, think and kind of brainstorm stuff and kind of like, and think like, okay, if you keep having this bad feeling about somebody, realizing, oh, like, I don't know, there's something maybe going on, and trusting your gut. I think we've all heard that feeling before. And I guess a lot of times the idea of trusting your gut, what could it hurt, right? Like if your gut tells you like, hey, this is a bad place to park, and you go to move to the next place. What's like the worst can happen is just that, you'll waste a little gas going and some sleep going to the next place. So anyway, the whole idea is that's a very big thing about just that freedom of kind of stepping back from just the purely rational and to get into a little bit kind of like this, this feeling type thing, intuition. I guess a good clickbait title for the future would be why Carl Jung says you need to become more irrational. Now, that's kind of true, but not in the same way, because he uses the word irrational not to say like crazy or whatever, something, but just to say like that something that doesn't follow like strictly a logical cause and effect type thing, that basically, because it's based on something like your unconscious and that sort of thing, and it has to do more with different things being connected more than being a cause and effect. Okay, and then the next one is thing that makes how van life, or how Jungian psychology makes van life more fun, is you can see the patterns in others and archetypes. So you'll notice, I mean, obviously, okay, psychology, its purpose is to kind of tell you, like, okay, what do people do, right? That's almost like the definition of it. And, I guess it doesn't take much. I guess it's a pretty, not a very strong statement, or it's pretty self-evident for me to say that if you're really good at doing psychology on the spot, when you're out there in the public, that it can actually help you. So if you want to think of yourself as sort of like a ship captain sailor out there as you navigate in your van or whatever, or you just out there being kind of like the captain of your soul, that as you interact the world of people out there, that it's pretty obvious that if you're good at psychology and reading people, that it's going to make it easier for you to predict what people are going to do and why they do it, and understand, so you don't get hung up on it if a certain person's acting a certain way, and also, like, how to diffuse a situation and stuff like that, which I'm not saying like I'm that myself, but I'm just saying this is the sort of thing we strive for, like, on this channel. One thing you realize in Jungian psychology is there's things called archetypes. See, so Freud, he would usually judge everything as far as like people's inner motivation by things like repressed sexual things and stuff like that, where with Jung, it's a lot more like about archetypes, and more like it's a little more complicated. So basically, well, the first thing to understand is, of course, is that we're saying that there is an unconscious in all of us that is acting not necessarily the same as our conscious, and sometimes they're, it's a thing you have to kind of say, what is the unconscious doing, and how is this person fitting into these patterns? And by knowing different things, like different archetypes, like the king, the hero, the jester, I don't know, just there's lots of different archetypal type things, but when you realize, sometimes you can kind of see that people can fall into those archetypal situations, and a closely related thing too is also the idea of a complex, which in some ways is kind of similar to an archetype, except it's more like a lot of times like your own personal experiences are built into it as well. And maybe a lot of times people are more dealing with complexes more than archetypes directly. But as far as like archetype, if I haven't said what it is for this video, in case you're completely young, it's just that, that there's a bunch of these sub-personalities that go across all cultures and stuff, that is part of the collective unconscious that people tend to act according to across the whole world, and maybe people don't realize. But once you realize people are kind of doing these things, and maybe also maybe saying some archetype or some other kind of like cliches, like the modern American business person or something, you start seeing kind of like, that's another thing. You kind of see that fakeness in people a little bit. It kind of makes you feel a little bit superior when you can see that fakeness. Not that that's what it's supposed to be, but maybe it kind of balances when you see that, like, that they're just doing acting out some silly like fantasy or something, power fantasy. Now, Jung would have viewed archetypes as a real fundamental thing, where they're a fundamental personality that's in all people, and they might even appear like in a dream, trying to like give a certain message or whatever, or they might not be very active in your life, a certain one, but it just might be one of the many kind of voices that, come up, but then they might be attached to something that we're later on going to talk about, the complex, where then it becomes like, more of like a personal thing more than like the archetype directly. Number 3 is you can see patterns in yourself and archetypes. So you can also realize it helps you to live your life when you realize, oh, I'm acting in this archetypal way. And then sometimes you could say, okay, you could choose to be like, okay, I know I'm kind of being influenced by this archetypal idea, but it seems to be like bringing me good success at the moment. And that's where it's good to realize that your ego is different than the other sub-personalities inside of us. So basically, the way Jung would say is like the ego is just the strongest complex that we have. So it's basically the party that says I, and basically, so when you realize there's a lot of this stuff going on inside you, but as long as you have kind of like that that ego, and I guess like maybe, I don't know if Freud would have called it like the super ego, but anyway, as long as you have kind of like that captain of your soul in a sense, in charge, that's fine. You can kind of work on these different things, but that's the thing. I mean, if a person is under the control of some kind of complex or archetype, and they don't even realize it, that'd be like very dangerous. So this is more like for, in a sense, this is also like more like what we call normal psychology, not for what we call pathological or, that sort of thing too, There's a difference between most of us who are lightly influenced by the unconscious and can use it as a tool, and people who are completely overwhelmed by it. And in that case, you might even say they might be considered crazy, if that terminology is still used today. Anyway, and then, okay, number 4, the fourth thing you realize is, all daydreaming is actually a noble thing. you ever seen like some of those things where people say, "Oh, I don't know how to daydream," and I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying there's a certain type of person that was kind of like annoying like that. Like the person who like brags about like never sleeping and being like working all the time and just like, "Oh, I don't daydream. I'm always thinking." And I say like, in Jung, I think would say like, that's bullshit. It's like, you're compensating for something, and and whatever. Daydreaming is good because daydreaming is actually, you kind of, I mean, if directed in a good way, you can kind of, I mean, you want to do other things as well too, not like only daydream, but as far as like, it can help you to kind of think, basically conjure stuff up from your unconscious, basically, like that can help you. That's what the whole Jungian thing is a lot is trying to like bring things up from your unconscious. And that's, if you're daydreaming and maybe imagining something, especially if you're a little aware of it, which would be our next one, active imagination. Let's just go ahead and, okay, so the joys of active imagination. So active imagination can be stuff like drawing some stuff, kind of like trying to visualize like somebody talking to you or something like that. Maybe like kind of thinking about something, kind of looking at the clouds and seeing, it's kind of like seeing like a fragment of fantasy and letting it kind of like develop, is like some quote as to like Jung said something like that. And so basically it's the idea that like, it's not just that you imagine stuff, but also that you kind of like realize you're imagining stuff and then you kind of control it. And then maybe you can even kind of like, you've heard of stuff like talk to your muse or something. I mean, that'll get into the next part, the part about complexes, but the idea that you can kind of just focus in. And apparently like some people like Jung, they were like really good at doing this sort of thing, and it's a thing you can develop. And maybe there's stuff like pareidolia, looking at different like shapes. Okay. Some people would even say like, psychedelics, but I'm talking in this case, I mean, yeah, okay, that's maybe, I'm not giving an opinion on that right now, but as far as like, that would be something that somebody else would believe. But it's also, it's basically all the same thing as like sleep dreams and stuff. It's just the idea that like trying to tap in the unconscious, realizing that you have an unconscious mind that's got so much information and is like so much smarter than your conscious mind that you want to be like tapping into that all the time. And then, just, and kind of realizing how your unconscious mind works. Maybe something like you realize like, oh, like if I like, stop like thinking about, I'm trying to remember somebody's name and I realize, oh, if I like stop thinking about it, I know it'll kind of pop out because it's like the unconscious will be like able to like more easily find it, or maybe realize, something like, I don't know, like I can sometimes do better, like throwing baskets or something with like in the waste can or something with my left hand, because it's like, I feel like I let my unconscious mind kind of like take control of that hand a little more or something like that. There's a lot of ways of kind of thinking about this kind of thing. And, oh, maybe that wasn't exactly related to what I said, but yeah, the idea of active imagination, the thing that you can just like be driving down the road and thinking about, oh, hey, like staring in the cloud, or, maybe think, oh, what's this van like? Oh, let's pretend like this fictional character, like, Tom Joad is with me, and imagine like, oh, that, he's talking to me, with complex for a company. Well, now the idea of that is like, we've all done the thing, where we said, we're talking with our dog, hey, John, and then think like, oh, yeah, just basically, have your imaginary friend. Well, basically, when you realize like, okay, maybe that it is kind of like an imagination, you're pretending something, but in fact, there is kind of like a power in like actually having an imaginary conversation with someone who's not really there. Because, okay, the idea of a complex, like Jung, early in his career, he had this thing called the word association test, and basically what he would find is like, okay, he would time like how long it would take you to think of like a substitute word. And then he realized like it might be like knife and cut and I don't know, like, and door or something. I mean, there might be, I don't know, there might be a bunch of words that are all kind of linked together. When he'd say they're constellated in the sense, like, it seems like whenever a person mentions any of these connected words, like it has, like it slows down what he calls an ideational process. Like, so there's something that gets in between, or maybe I think that it's called dissociativity, where it's like it slows down, and then it seems like, but it seems like some of these different linked things actually form like a complex of linked ideas, and that tend to even like try to like have kind of like somewhat like an autonomous will. They seem like in some ways like they act like a sub-personality, and that's a big realization that and we've all heard of stuff like the shadow. Well, that's another thing. Okay, yeah, that's a bigger thing where anything you repress, it becomes this force that wants to kind of like oppose what you consciously want, so it's like, so that idea, but the idea of complexes for company, yeah, you can try to even think like, I mean, I try to come up with all kinds of active imagination because I'm doing anything I can to try to like develop my theory for the YouTube channel, and it's like, but I can kind of like, okay, so I'm going to try to pretend like, hey, that I'm such and such, and kind of really imagine what it's like for this person. And just, you could even, yeah, be listening to something and having a conversation with it. You could maybe even kind of like pretend that you're that person or something, or, there's also a thing like, where somehow like it was called participation mystique, where somehow your psyche is somehow bound together with like some physical object, whereas a person might put on a certain mask back in the old days, like a tribal thing, and kind of take on that personality, and it might actually be an actual psychological thing. So anyway, well, there's lots of ways we can explore that, the idea of complexes, as far as like some kind of like, hobby to do as you're driving. And so you drive and try to see what you can see on those endless, like, Nebraska cornfields, some shape you can see, so anyway, it just brings that kind of flavor to life, I guess, and the idea of like thinking about, you're being driven by oh yeah, okay. And you could also think about too that, okay, like any person, living or dead or fictional, I think about, there's a fact that there's sort of like this like, simulation in your mind. This complex is kind of based on them, and then, now this complex, it could be like there's the idea of a muse has been around a long time. And if you think about it, a person can imagine there's this like person telling you, oh, write this, I haven't really tried doing that, but as far as YouTube, I have like a YouTube muse, but that was like a traditional thing. And I don't know what they thought about it, but if you just think about it, yeah, I mean, just by imagining someone doing that, it does actually, it gives like your mind a different way of like processing that information through the unconscious, and then have it be expressed, and then how about whenever you get like whenever you get in the right mood and you kind of make up like some poems and stuff. I mean, that's got to be like directly tapping into the unconscious to have that level, that kind of creativity where you can do it and you can kind of get in the mood, kind of like pretend for a second. You kind of like almost can hear that voice of that person for a second. So it's like, yeah, we all, a lot of us do these kind of things, but once you become like more conscious of that's how it works. And you can kind of like try to develop as you really see like that power of the unconscious mind. Obviously, if a person actually had multiple personality disorder, that would be extremely scary and bad to have happen. But I guess what I'm saying is there's kind of like maybe a lighter form of this that happens to all of us. And once you kind of recognize that, then it kind of frees you in different ways to say, like, okay, even like maybe you get mad for a second, then you kind of look back, to kind of like almost look outside yourself and say, oh, I can kind of like I'm looking in. Oh, that was me. I was acting like this with this archetypal thing. That's not really like the real me. And then of course, and then, oh yeah, stuff in the how he's saying about the simulation. Yeah, I mean, something like, okay, like a dead parent, like my dead dad. I mean, I figure like something like, maybe I'll sometimes kind of imagine his voice at different times and thinking that, but because there's a simulation inside of you that actually is based on that actual person, it might actually be giving you information that's pretty similar to what that actual person would actually give you, whether or not there's any actual real, mystical connection there, but just as far as like your brain can kind of figure out what that person would have said. Let's see. And then, okay, I said about dreaming is noble. Okay. Okay, yeah, I forgot to mention about, yes, dreaming is good. It's a noble thing. Obviously, I mentioned daydreaming, and dreaming itself is obviously that's the best way. Now, unfortunately, it's not as easy for a lot of us to remember our dreams as we'd like to. I mean, now you can work on that. There's different techniques, but definitely we would say that like actual dreaming is a very good thing, and it's a very important thing that your mind does, and it makes these connections, and in many ways it comes up with symbolism that gives you the energy to oh, I said, okay, number 8, it makes van life more fun, or life in general, because it's an alternative to the bootstrap. Okay, so you always hear people like, pull yourself up in your bootstrap, and they never have any answer other than just try harder, push harder, push in. This is much more, okay, I guess some people could say it's like kind of like maybe like the path to laziness, but it's kind of like I say, yeah, no, it's like it's, work less and work, or maybe, like basically that there's another way of, you have to, in Jungian psychology, it'd be the thing to like try to get motivated. Now, sometimes you might have to force yourself to get up or whatever, but we're saying to truly want to like have the kind of life, you want to feel like life is flowing and you're being pulled along, and you don't want to feel like it's like you're just doing something you hate. So basically what you're going to try to do with Jungian psychology is align your conscious and your unconscious mind, and then you're going to look into your unconscious. He calls it like the transcendent function, and there probably is like a real thing he does with his patients, and it's a complicated thing, and to probably get the real thing, you need to go to a real therapist, like the people like this Jungian Life. But I'm talking about a little bit on a lower level, that just day to day you can kind of like do this to try to inject some fun into like driving is, find out like, oh, maybe I really have an interest in this. And, oh, why is that? Because of this archetype, and then, yeah, I think that's a big thing too with a lot of which I've found in my life is just, trying to like, learn new experiences, not, learn like new music, get new subjects, just find a way to look at the way the world is. I don't know if I even have it on here, but part of my thing too is I try to make it where the idea is there's no flyover country. You can try to make any place interesting by the different coloring and stuff. I mean, not every place is the Grand Canyon, but I mean, it's like, but still, I mean, there's like, ways of looking like just like at a normal thing, like the beauty and just like a basic, like a Casey's, sitting in the back, on the side of the parking lot, like a Casey's truck stop, like in the middle of like, Iowa or something, something kind of plain, but a real kind of beauty to it that you can kind of see by projecting different like psychological quantities on that, if that sounds general enough. But, and then, so it's an alternative to the bootstrap. So you just try to say like, hey, someone says, hey, just try harder. And you say, oh, this is like one alternative way, and I mean, there's been different videos put into that, I don't know but anyway, let's see. Then the next one is, okay, understanding beauty. Now, whether you understand see the beauty around you or not, it's like, the thing is, it's like, whether you can enjoy the beauty of this scene here by the harbor here or whatever, but it's like, but when you psychologically kind of understand the reason for the beauty, then I think it gives you like a more interesting way of analyzing and saying stuff like, well, I mean, we've gone to on this channel a lot. We talk about abstraction versus empathy, but like, oh, this is flowing. Oh, this map is beautiful. Why do I love this map? Because of the abstraction in it and the ability to like, feel like it kind of like almost sums up the whole universe in a single breath. And then, stuff like that, the flowing of the grain, you can just start looking at just different, I've tried to even like look into more like, I'm not saying I've gotten that far into like understanding the world of art, but I've tried to get into a bit, like say, okay, like this is like understanding like the beauty of some abstract painting or something like that, or, just but it's kind of like a way of experiencing life in general, because it kind of explains that like, even if you think about the whole world being split into some kind of like hyperspace or something, that, there would be like, there's certain things that tend to like where you flow into a story in the same way. Like there's stories that are more abstract. There's the, where you see like all the divisions and stuff. Yeah. Divisions and connections. That's a big part of the abstraction. But then also like, like the flowing, like the diamond, that it basically draws you along. Like you ever like been talking to someone and you talk about, the Sopranos. Remember when Tony did this? Oh yeah. And then he went there and then they got lost. And then you feel like all of a sudden, like instantly connected to someone by like, enjoying like some story, because you're both being pulled like along in some sort, in the same way that, there's a flowing in nature, that you're being pulled like in some fictional space or something like that, So this sort of beauty can be seen, this sort of flowing beauty was explained by Lips when he was saying something like, look, okay, you see the beauty in some column because you feel this like striving upward in your body, and maybe they'd say like this, that certain objects might have this upright feeling to them, and maybe even like sometimes there might even be like this like drunk man would walk and kind of like tip his hat to like some pole because he sees something standing upright. And the idea is that there's something flowing in your body, some kind of beautiful shape or something, and when you see something kind of similar to that in nature, you project this image onto nature, and then it enhances it. And then in a sense, it feels like it's alive to you. And then I was saying that in the same way that like, okay, then a certain curve goes in because it seems like, it's striving upward, or you can feel the flow. But then I was saying, even in a sense of like, if you want to imagine that there's some sort of a hyperspace with different coordinates where something like some narrative, like The Sopranos, I gave that example, lives, that because there's a certain flow within a story or something like that, you feel yourself kind of like being drawn along in the same way, in a sense, maybe your body might feel kind of like that same way as it feels like when it sees something that's actually reality. Like, the idea, but when you can kind of understand something like that, I'm just saying this gives you more like an appreciation for what we already do. And that's what I'm doing is, I'm studying on my own based on, watching some YouTube videos and like reading a lot of stuff, trying to come up with my own kind of like road theory, kind of like maybe am I the road professor, or like the road prophet, the road. I'm just having fun with it because I know like Peter's watching this right now, but it's like, yeah, I mean, and I'm just being a little grandiose for fun. I'm not really claiming. I'm also trying to claim that I'm not really. There's lots of people smarter than me. I'm just, and I can defer to their knowledge. Like especially when I make mistakes, say, hey, I never said I'm no effing professor. So anyway, but I think I may have forgot to mention about the abstraction part of beauty too, as well, which is seeing some sort of repeatable pattern. Usually, just something like putting a grid pattern on something even makes it more abstract, where you're seeing just like a certain angle of something that allows you to, in a certain aspect of an item, a certain variable that allows you just to quickly sum up the information. But then when you see it out in nature, you say, oh, yeah, there's something that's like this pattern, or like the way the light is. This is more of like a crystalline pattern. Maybe you could say like there's more of like a crystalline abstract beauty in places with like lots of like rocky outcropping, especially like igneous rock, what we have here in Duluth, where there's like real like solid divisions and lines between things. But the main place that the abstract beauty comes about when you're out, right, is mostly, it seems like, when it's like looking at maps a lot. So just making a going someplace and making a really good map in your head or on paper. Just it just adds to the experience. Which corresponds to the part of the feeling yourself into the world, like that part we mentioned before, which is more like the experiential part of it. The thing is, like, when it helps you see the world in a different way, and I can say a lot about that, but you start seeing like symbolism everywhere. Like when, you're driving around, you can say like, oh, anything that looks kind of like a castle thing or kind of like an enclosure, it's sort of like the mother archetype or something like that. You can say, oh, maybe that's why I'm kind of drawn to that, because there's that feeling of being like at home. Oh, I guess here what I did is I kind of combined the symbols, seeing symbols everywhere with seeing patterns everywhere, and then especially the mother archetype, which is kind of like a special one that you see almost everywhere. The mother archetype, that's almost like the same thing as saying like the archetype of home, I think you could say. But then when it's taken too far, it becomes a negative mother, where it's like the castle becomes like a tomb or something. So when you get actually like sucked into something, and I was gonna say something, but if you listen to that song by Alice in Chains called Down in a Hole, like that almost gives like that same paradoxical thing of wanting to be like surrounded, wanting to melt into something, become like part of the Great Link from Star Trek or something, from something like that, merging at the oceanic existence versus like the getting sucked in, and how sometimes like there's that same thing that you can see that death thing of him being like kind of like sucked in by the siren of like, oh, I want to be inside you, he says, but then in a sense you're getting crushed too. So there's that balance too. He says like his wings are getting crushed, and then so anyway, but you can see that symbolism. You can see like in literature people making reference to different things like that. You can have you can realize when you see like, oh, that thing was built a certain way or so. Okay, I'm not really coming up with a great example, but yeah, it's easy once you start knowing a few principles of Jungian psychology to kind of see like symbolism everywhere, and maybe even when it's not exactly there, but at least it does give you like a lens to see it, because it does become a kind of like a little bit more like, okay, so it's the opposite. It becomes like a little bit the opposite of the solid science, like the more like, but I'm trying to put it in its proper place too, using like the hard science for like the important stuff. Anyway, and then what else did I say? You see recurring patterns in nature, archetypes, mother. Okay, so yeah, I guess there's probably a lot more I could say on this subject, but yeah, I'm already 25 minutes. But yeah, as far as like that's the basic intro to like how Jungian psychology can make van life suck less. All right, so I guess I'm gonna get going here. All right, see you guys.